The afternoon sun had long since slipped behind the horizon, leaving Los Angeles bathed in the dim amber glow of early evening. Inside Il Giardino, the air shimmered with an almost electric tension. The clinking of wine glasses and the murmur of distant conversation faded into insignificance as two women, seated opposite each other at a corner table, waged a silent war through glances that burned hotter than any spoken word. Brooke Logan and Taylor Hayes, two names forever bound together by love, betrayal, and an unending rivalry over the same man, Ridge Forrester. Their battles had stretched across decades, seasons, and heartbreaks, yet tonight, it felt different. Tonight, something irreversible hovered in the air, an invisible hand tightening around the edges of fate. Brooke sat tall, her posture rigid, her blue eyes gleaming with restrained fury as she swirled the stem of her wine glass, the red liquid glinting like blood under the soft candlelight. Taylor, seated opposite, had an expression that alternated between defiance and exhaustion, her every word laced with the controlled precision of someone who had grown tired of fighting but didn't know how to stop. For a moment, neither spoke, as though the quiet itself were a weapon waiting to be wielded. Then, inevitably, Brooke broke it. Her voice was calm at first, too calm, the kind that came before an emotional storm. "You talk about love, Taylor," Brooke said, her tone edged with venomous sweetness. "But tell me, when has your version of love ever been pure? You spent years chasing Ridge like a shadow chasing light, and every time, you lost him. You can't rewrite history, not after everything you've done." The words hit like glass splintering. Taylor's face froze, then twisted, the fury in her eyes barely contained. She had endured Brooke's sanctimony for years, endured being painted as the manipulator, the interloper, the woman who could never measure up to Brooke's glamour or Ridge's endless forgiveness. But tonight, the accusation cut deeper. "You think you're the victim," Taylor spat, her voice trembling not with fear but rage. "You've destroyed marriages, families, lives. All in the name of love. You made suffering an art form, Brooke, and now you want to wear Ridge's love like a crown, as if you've earned it." Brooke's lips curled into a smile, sharp, brittle. "At least I've never run away when things got hard," she hissed. "At least I've faced my sins instead of hiding behind therapy sessions and pity parties. You call yourself a healer, Taylor, but you've broken more hearts than you've ever mended, starting with your own." It was too much. The words struck Taylor like physical blows, and something inside her cracked, a fault line long buried beneath layers of composure and restraint. Her breath quickened. The restaurant seemed to close in, the sound of laughter from other tables turning distant and distorted. Her hands trembled as she rose abruptly from her seat, her chair scraping against the tiled floor with a sharp, jarring screech. "You don't get to speak to me about morality, Brooke," she choked out, voice breaking. "Not after what you've done to all of us." Her departure was sudden, violent almost. Glass toppled, a waiter flinched, and a hush fell across the restaurant as she stormed out, leaving Brooke staring after her, stunned yet unyielding. For a fleeting second, Brooke considered following her, perhaps even apologizing, but pride sealed her lips. Outside, the night swallowed Taylor whole. The wind was cool against her flushed skin as she stepped into the street, tears stinging her eyes, fury clouding her vision. Everything blurred, the lights, the sounds, the movement of cars. Her thoughts raced faster than her pulse, a spiral of anger and humiliation and heartbreak. She had spent years rebuilding herself, learning to forgive, to grow, to heal, and yet one confrontation with Brooke had reduced her to this, a woman undone by words. She barely noticed the world around her. The rush of cars became a distant hum, the glow of headlights an indistinct glare in her tear-filled eyes. Her heels clicked frantically against the pavement as she crossed the street without looking, consumed by the storm within her. Somewhere in the distance, a horn blared, long, sharp, desperate. Then, in a single heartbeat, everything froze. The dark silhouette of a car appeared out of nowhere, moving too fast, its headlights slicing through the night. The screech of tires tore through the air, followed by the sickening thud of metal against flesh. The impact threw Taylor to the ground with brutal force, her body collapsing like a marionette whose strings had been cut. Her head struck the asphalt. A pool of crimson began to bloom beneath her, spreading like ink in water. The street erupted into chaos. A woman screamed. Someone shouted for help. A waiter from Il Giardino rushed outside, his face blanching as he recognized the fallen figure. The car, a dark sedan with tinted windows, hesitated for the briefest moment before speeding away into the night, its tires screeching as it disappeared around the corner. The echo of the collision lingered, a haunting note that seemed to reverberate through every heart that had witnessed it. Brooke burst through the restaurant doors seconds later, drawn by the commotion, her heels clattering against the sidewalk. The sight that greeted her made her freeze. Taylor's motionless body lying in the street, her auburn hair splayed across the pavement like a halo of ruin. Brooke's heart seized. All the anger, all the pride, all the venom that had filled her minutes ago dissolved into horror. "Taylor," she screamed, rushing forward, dropping to her knees beside her rival, her friend, her lifelong adversary. There was no response. Taylor's eyes were half open, unseeing, her lips slightly parted as if still trying to form one final word. The smell of blood and exhaust filled the air, mingling with the faint aroma of basil and garlic from the restaurant. Brooke's trembling hands pressed against Taylor's arm, desperate to find a pulse. The sirens came soon after, loud, shrill, cutting through the stunned silence. Paramedics swarmed the scene, their movements swift but futile. Within minutes, the pronouncement came. Taylor Hayes, dead at the scene. The world seemed to tilt. Brooke stumbled backward, shaking her head in disbelief. Her own words, sharp, cruel, unnecessary, echoed in her mind like ghosts. "You've broken more hearts than you've mended." She wanted to scream them away, to take them back, to wake from the nightmare that had unfolded faster than she could comprehend. But the truth was as immovable as the lifeless body before her. The police cordoned off the area, their radios crackling with static as investigators took statements. Someone mentioned a dark car. Someone else swore they saw a figure running from the alley nearby, dressed in black, disappearing into the shadows. Surveillance cameras were checked, but the footage revealed only fragments: the glint of a car's fender, a pair of headlights, and a fleeting glimpse of movement that vanished into the darkness. It wasn't enough. Back inside Il Giardino, the once bustling restaurant was now shrouded in somber quiet. Brooke sat alone at the table where it had all begun, her wine untouched, her reflection warped in the glass. The weight of what had happened pressed on her chest like an anchor. She thought of Ridge, how she would tell him, how he would look at her when he learned that his ex-wife had died moments after a confrontation that she herself had fueled. The night deepened, the city's pulse slowing as if in mourning. Outside, the street where Taylor had fallen was now empty save for a few scattered petals from a nearby flower stall, trampled and red-stained. But somewhere, beyond the reach of flashing police lights, someone watched, hidden in the shadows, eyes fixed on the scene from a distance. The faint glow of a cigarette illuminated a sharp jawline before vanishing again into the darkness. Whoever it was, they lingered only long enough to see the ambulance drive away before turning and walking into the night. In the days that followed, grief rippled through every corner of their world. Ridge's devastation was immeasurable. Steffi and Thomas were inconsolable. Even Brooke, whose rivalry with Taylor had defined much of her life, found herself drowning in guilt. She replayed their final words again and again, each repetition cutting deeper than the last. Every cruel accusation now felt like a wound she had inflicted not just on Taylor, but on herself. The press speculated endlessly, their headlines ruthless: "Renowned psychiatrist killed in hit-and-run outside Il Giardino." But behind the sensationalism, the truth remained elusive. Who had been behind the wheel that night, and why? The police investigation continued, uncovering fragments but no answers. The car had been stolen hours before the incident. The driver had vanished. Witnesses contradicted each other, some swearing it was an accident, others insisting it looked deliberate. But one thing was certain. The moment Taylor stepped into that street, her life, and the lives of everyone connected to her, had changed forever. Weeks later, Brooke stood alone at the cliffs overlooking the ocean, the same place she and Taylor had once spoken of love, forgiveness, and the fragile peace they both pretended to want. The wind whipped through her hair, carrying with it the scent of salt and regret. She whispered Taylor's name into the night, her voice breaking, her tears indistinguishable from the spray of the sea. Somewhere deep inside, she knew that this wasn't the end. The car, the driver, the shadow that fled, all of it felt orchestrated, purposeful, as if Taylor's death was only the first note in a much darker melody. And though Brooke didn't know it yet, far away, in the flickering light of a dim motel room, a figure sat watching the security footage from Il Giardino on a laptop screen. The frame froze on the moment Taylor stepped off the curb, her face illuminated in the headlights, fear and anger colliding in one final expression. The figure exhaled slowly, the corners of their lips curling into a faint, unreadable smile before the screen went black. Back in Los Angeles, the waves crashed endlessly against the cliffs, and the city carried on as if nothing had changed. But for those who had loved Taylor Hayes, the world would never be the same. The tragedy that began as an argument in a crowded restaurant had become something far greater, a mystery, a wound, and perhaps, one day, a reckoning. For in a city built on secrets, death was rarely accidental. And somewhere in the shadows, the truth waited, patient, cold, and inevitable, ready to rise when the time was right. The news of Taylor's death spread through Los Angeles like wildfire, igniting a wave of grief that consumed every corner of the Forrester family. It wasn't merely a tragedy, it was a wound that cut through decades of love, rivalry, and redemption. The Forrester mansion, once alive with laughter and clinking glasses, had fallen into silence. Every portrait on the wall seemed to watch in mourning. Every echo of footsteps through the marble halls carried the weight of absence. Ridge stood by the window, unmoving, his gaze lost somewhere beyond the horizon, as if searching for an answer the universe refused to give. Steffi had barely spoken since the night of the accident, her eyes red and hollow, while Thomas, who had been away in New York for a design project, returned to Los Angeles the moment he heard the news. The moment he stepped into the house, something inside him shifted. It wasn't just grief that consumed him, it was fury. Taylor's death had been violent, sudden, and senseless. A hidden run outside Il Giardino, the restaurant where she had just argued with Brooke. A car that appeared out of nowhere, a screech of tires, a body thrown to the pavement. The police had labeled it an accident, at least for now, but Thomas didn't believe in accidents. Not when his mother's final moments were preceded by a fight with the one woman who had caused her more suffering than anyone else. Not when the driver had vanished into the night, leaving no trace but the wreckage of their lives. Brooke had tried to attend the memorial, her guilt visible in every trembling movement, but Steffi refused to look at her. Ridge had not spoken to Brooke since the night of the accident. The unspoken truth was unbearable. Brooke had been the last person to see Taylor alive, the last person to hear her voice, to provoke her pain. And though Brooke's tears were genuine, they couldn't erase the words she had hurled across that restaurant table, words that now replayed in her mind in endless torment. "You've broken more hearts than you've mended." It was supposed to be a cutting remark, not a prophecy. Days turned into weeks, and the city moved on as it always did, but Thomas couldn't. He spent hours reviewing the police report, studying every grainy frame of security footage, reading between the lines of every press statement. Each unanswered question only deepened his obsession. Who had been driving the car? Why had they been near Il Giardino that night? Why did the footage show a second figure, someone running into the shadows just seconds after the crash? The more he looked, the more convinced he became that this was no random act. And then there was Bill Spencer. Bill's name had always lingered on the edges of Forrester chaos. Never directly responsible, but never innocent either. His ruthless ambition, his long and complicated history with both Brooke and Ridge, and his willingness to manipulate anyone to get what he wanted made him a perfect suspect in Thomas's mind. Bill had once pursued Brooke with obsessive devotion. He had also despised Taylor for exposing his worst moments. To Thomas, it wasn't hard to imagine Bill orchestrating the accident, perhaps not by his own hands, but through the power and money that had always shielded him from consequence. Thomas's return to Los Angeles reignited tensions that had been simmering for years. He was sharper now, more focused, his grief distilled into a cold, precise anger. When he walked into Spencer Publications one morning without an appointment, the entire building seemed to hold its breath. His dark suit was immaculate, but his eyes burned with something primal, something dangerous. Bill was in his office, leaning back in his leather chair, an expression of measured curiosity spreading across his face as Thomas entered unannounced. "Well, if it isn't Thomas Forrester," Bill said with that familiar smirk, one corner of his mouth lifting in condescending amusement. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Thomas's voice was low but steady, each word deliberate. "You know exactly why I'm here." He took a step closer, his jaw clenched. "You were near Il Giardino the night my mother died. You've got eyes and ears all over the city. Don't pretend you don't know what happened." Bill's smile faltered slightly, but his eyes remained cool, calculating. "I think you're letting grief cloud your judgment," he said evenly. "It was a tragic accident, nothing more." "Don't insult my intelligence," Thomas snapped, his control slipping. "That car didn't come out of nowhere. Whoever was behind the wheel knew what they were doing. And you," he jabbed a finger toward Bill, "you had every reason to want her gone. My mother stood between you and Brooke for years. She exposed your lies. You think I don't see it? You think I don't know what kind of man you are?" Bill rose slowly from his chair, his movements measured, almost theatrical. His height and presence filled the room, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Be very careful, Thomas. Accusations like that can destroy careers, especially when you have no proof." "Then maybe I'll find some," Thomas shot back. "And when I do, I'll make sure everyone knows who you really are." For a long, unbearable moment, they stared at each other, two men bound by old sins and new grief. Then Thomas turned sharply, leaving the office before his rage consumed him entirely. The glass doors closed behind him with a hiss, and Bill stood motionless, his smirk returning, slower this time, darker. Back at Forrester Creations, Steffi tried to talk sense into her brother, but his obsession had already taken root. He spent his nights scrolling through police records, calling contacts, even hiring private investigators. He barely slept, barely ate. Ridge warned him that his anger would destroy him, but Thomas couldn't stop. Every thread he pulled seemed to lead back to the same place: money, power, and manipulation, the very things Bill Spencer represented. Meanwhile, Brooke lived in her own private prison. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Taylor's face, the anger, the hurt, the disbelief. She replayed the argument over and over, each time wishing she had walked away, wishing she had said something kind instead of cruel. The guilt was suffocating. Ridge's silence was the final punishment. She had lost him before, but this time felt different. This time, she had lost his respect. One evening, as the city lights flickered beyond the hills, Thomas received an anonymous message. The notification appeared on his phone at exactly midnight. There was no name, no words, only an image. His hands trembled as he opened it. The photograph showed a car, its front bumper dented, the paint scratched and stained with something dark. Beneath it, barely visible, was a timestamp that matched the night of Taylor's death. The image quality was low, but one detail stood out. The license plate had been deliberately blurred. Thomas's breath caught. His first instinct was to call the police, but something stopped him. Whoever sent this knew what they were doing. The timing, the precision, it was a message, not evidence. And if it was a message, then it meant someone was watching him. He glanced toward the window, his reflection staring back at him in the glass. For a fleeting second, he thought he saw movement outside, a shadow slipping away into the night. The next morning, he returned to Spencer Publications. Bill greeted him with that same unreadable calm, the kind that made Thomas's skin crawl. "You again," Bill said smoothly, pouring himself a glass of scotch. "I hope this isn't another attempt to play detective." Thomas threw the phone onto Bill's desk, the image still glowing on the screen. "Explain this," he demanded. Bill studied the photo for a long moment, his expression unchanged. Then, slowly, a faint smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Interesting," he murmured. "Looks like someone wants you to think I had something to do with it." Thomas's voice cracked with fury. "You're lying." "Maybe," Bill replied, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Or maybe the truth isn't as simple as you want it to be. You should be careful, Thomas. When you stare too long into the dark, sometimes it stares back." Thomas's fists clenched. He wanted to hit him, to break that mask of indifference. But instead, he turned and walked out, the sound of Bill's faint chuckle following him down the hall like a curse. Outside, the city glowed with artificial light, but to Thomas it all felt false, an illusion of peace built overwrought. His phone buzzed again. Another message. This time, it contained only words. "You're getting closer." No number. No trace. Just the same creeping chill running down his spine. As he stared out over the skyline of Los Angeles, Thomas knew one thing with absolute certainty. His mother's death was not random. Somewhere in the glittering darkness of the city, someone had orchestrated it, and now that person was watching him. Back at Spencer Publications, Bill stood by his window, the lights of the city reflected in his cold blue eyes. He lifted his glass, studying his own reflection, a faint, dangerous smile playing on his lips. Whether he was amused, guilty, or plotting his next move, no one could tell. But as the night deepened, his smirk widened, just slightly, as if he already knew the next chapter of the game had begun. And in the distance, on a darkened screen inside an unknown room, the footage of the crash replayed again and again. The car. The impact. The shadow fleeing into the night. The camera froze on a single frame, a hand gripping the steering wheel, a silver ring catching the light. The figure behind it remained obscured, but the implication was chilling. Whoever had taken Taylor Hayes' life had not disappeared. They were still out there, hidden in plain sight, watching every move, waiting for the right moment to strike again.
Oh.